Hi, I'm Mark Redman, and I want to welcome you to Brenau University's Castelli Gallery. The art management students here have curated a show of my father's artwork. It's the first show in over 25 years. They've done it in a retrospective style, and we'll show you that here in the Castelli Gallery before we head to the President's Gallery for the remainder of the collection, which is a lot of fine artwork that my father had produced in his lifetime. So let's begin here in the Castelli Gallery, and I'll take you through it personally. Here in the Castelli Gallery, the students have put together the retrospective, Lenn Redman, a working artist. And it includes just more than the artwork. It includes some of the various memorabilia and artifacts from that time period. Here's a badge of my father, the 1933 Century of Progress World's Fair in Chicago. There's more from the 39 World's Fair in New York where he traveled to as well. He really enjoyed drawing on the Midway in these shows. Here's an example of the caricatures that he was doing in this time period as well, 30s to the 40s. Many celebrities of that time period are displayed here. He was well known for his caricaturing of the celebrities. He was also out in California working for Disney. He worked on the Fantasia show, and he did the Sorcerer's Apprentice scene. He also did Porky the Pig for Leon Schlesinger at the time, and these are some examples of the work of that time period. Here's some more examples of my father's artwork from that time period. Toscanini caricature, caricature of Strakowski, and then we have some entertainers of that time period as well. Here's one of Louis Armstrong. There were not many African Americans being drawn in this time period. My father was one of the few. And then we have a caricature of John Wayne. It doesn't get any more American than that, does it? Continuing along the timeline of my father's career, we're now in the 50s and 60s time period. My father was in Chicago during the 50s doing many caricatures. You have examples here of J. Edgar, Zsa Zsa, and these are some classics, Alfred Hitchcock, and then Sammy Davis Jr. This one's actually signed by Sammy. My father in 1957 was working the Chez Perry nightclub where Sammy was doing the shows there that particular evening. Afterwards, my father gives the caricature to Sammy. Well, he's going to different hotels and different places, doesn't particularly want to take it with him, signs it and gives it back to my father, which is how we have this particular piece in the collection. The students had put together quite a few graphics of the time period. Here's my father working, doing Adlai Stevenson, and some of these pictures are classic of my father. You see here where he has the overhead projector, and he's drawing with a grease pencil on acetate. This was his trademark caricaturing in crowds. That way, everybody could see on the screen behind him the caricature as he was progressing through the artwork. As we move on to the right, we have both a letter, a picture, and a caricature of Cassius Clay. Muhammad Ali. So Muhammad Ali wrote back to my father here, talking about how much he appreciated my father's support of his stance on the war at that time, and that he would cherish this letter and for the rest of his life and place it in his scrapbook to turn over to his grandchildren. Here's a classic shot, Muhammad Ali. As we move along the timeline of my father's career, we've now ventured into the 60s, and you see how his artwork has changed as we go. Here we have caricatures of many famous people of the time period, and done in various formats as well. We have ink on paper of Golda Meir, John Kennedy, crayon and ink on paper of Phyllis Diller. Here we have Liza Minnelli, ink and colored pencil on paper of Goldie Hawn. Here's Barbra Streisand, ink and crayon as well. Ink, crayon, and interesting correction fluid, marker, and acrylic on paper. And then Carol Burnett. These are some amazing caricatures of movie stars of that time period. My father also chronicled his life during this time period, and where you and I might do a journal, he draws throughout his life. And what this is an example of is his personal sketchbook. And this was the 60s. Again, turbulent time in our country. We have caricatures here of Martin Luther King and others at various rallies. And then it's followed by, unfortunately, Martin Luther King memorial services. And this particular picture here, it's a benefit cocktail party my father attended. Buy-in for, ready for this, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at the home of a person in California. The guest speaker, James Baldwin, and he signs it as you see there, May 29th, 1968. On a lighter note, my father also did caricatures of many of the African American stars of that time period. And here's one of Bill Cosby, as we all know and love. Finishing out on the caricatures from this time period, here's some more examples of my father's work. Here we have Robert Redford, ink and pastel on paper. Here we have Burt Reynolds, ink, mixed media on paper. Alan Alda, ink crayon, ready for this, correction fluid on paper. A little technique he used during those times. Carol O'Connor, ink colored pencil, crayon, and acrylic on paper. Elliott Gould and Bob Hope, both ink on paper. And then a true classic, Walter Matthau, pastel and ink on paper. Now that's a classic shot, wouldn't you say? In the 60s, my father's caricaturing business began to fade. You know, with the advent of TV, that particular business was not as popular as it had been in the 50s and 60s. So my father goes to Los Angeles to once again work in the animation field. He works for Hanna-Barbera and Filmation Corporation. And here are some of the examples of his work. We have the Groovy Ghoulies, the Brady Kids, Sabrina and the Witches. You have the Archies. You have Linus and the Lion-Headed. We have many of the examples from that particular show here. We also have Journey Back to Oz, which my father worked on during that time period, and examples of that artwork here. Very, very amazing that the cells have held up this many years. In the 80s, my father wrote a poem called What Am I?, expounding the virtues of human diversity. He was no longer working in the animation industry, but really turned his attention to his poem and self-illustrating the poem and its artwork. He did such with a book called What Am I? And a Parents and Teachers Guide, What Am I? These particular books, along with 11 large format prints that he also self-published, these are the original artwork for those prints we're showing you here. So all of these you'll find in these two books. Each of them has a different verse associated with them. Before we leave the Castelli Gallery and head to the President's Gallery, I wanted to show you two additional pieces that are hung here in Castelli. This particular piece, ink on paper, the interns discovered in some of my father's materials. It's of Ray Bradbury in 1986. My father writes, "What am I doing? I should ask you for your autograph, Lenn Redman." "Okay, I will. How about it?" Apparently he hands it to Ray, and sure enough, Ray says, "Thanks, Ray Bradbury, 2/28/86. And the last piece I want to show you here in this gallery is a self-portrait my father did of himself just prior to his death. This is the last piece that we know that he did, and the last image we have of my father. Well, let's go ahead now and leave the Castelli and head over to the President's Gallery and show you all the artwork that's hung there as well. Follow me. Well, here we are at the President's Gallery at Brenau University. I appreciate you coming here to see the remainder of the collection. We'll take you through a few of the caricatures and some of the What Am I series of art here, which is on display in this gallery. And then we'll finish with the fine art, or what I'm calling articatures, that my father had done toward the end of his career. You see on this wall a variety of caricatures from famous folks, as you'll see, Dick Cavett, We have many others, and then everyday people as well, which is really what my father enjoyed doing the most. That's drawing caricatures of regular folks at conventions, at various events. Here's a gentleman that, businessman. I'm sure this was something that everybody enjoyed in his company. And then the final one here actually is a self-portrait of my father. And he did toward, again, the end of his life. Quite a likeness during that time, don't you think? Let's show you some of the other artwork in this gallery. Sammy Davis Jr. There's a lot of history with Sammy Davis and my father going back to the 40s in the Chez Perry nightclub where Sammy was performing many an evening, and my dad was the opening act. So my dad would do the caricature of Sammy. As soon as he was done, Sammy would come out and do his evening performance. It was quite entertaining. We have additional items here as well from the What Am I collection. This is a portion of it called the Black Earth. I believe just about every atrocity on Earth is there except for maybe a BP oil well spilling into the Gulf. Everything else is quite an amazing piece for the time, definitely ahead of its time. Now, also in that What Am I series, my father produced various baby faces in multiple colors, not just black and white, but polka dot and herringbone and checkered, and who knows what else, as he said in his poem. This particular one is also in the series What Am I? And it's man out in the planets, sunburst planets. It's us here on Earth. And finally, in this particular wall of this gallery, we have what the students have called the Mariachi Man. As I recall, this is quite a famous Hispanic comedian from the 30s and 40s. Here's another piece I wanted to show you, another self-portrait that my father did. Now this was done in 1969, very disturbing time in our country at that point, and I believe also in my father's life. And I believe the seriousness is reflected in this particular self-portrait. And here at the President's Gallery, we have the remainder of my father's collection. These are works he did toward the end of his life. And these are what he called fine art abstract caricatures, and I'm calling articatures. He's taken various elements of the masters, as you'll see here, and he's incorporated them back into artwork and does a caricature of the artist in the artist's own style. A creative, no one's ever seen anything like this style of work. So, Dolly. This Jackson Pollock is one of my favorites my father produced. I actually had it hanging in my home for many years without the white mat and didn't have the pop that it has today with the white mat. You can actually see his face coming out here, his arm, the big brushes that he used to use, splattering the paint everywhere. I think my father did an excellent job capturing him in this image. Also in this collection, you'll have Picasso. I think this was the three violinists. My father even added cherries for the eyes, because my understanding is he liked young girls. And we have Paul Klee. We have Miro, a very famous piece of Miro. Well, there was just a circle up here. My father makes a caricature of Miro and puts him in his own piece. Also in the collection, this is Matisse. Now, in Matisse, later on in his career, he was in a wheelchair and he was doing the cuttings. And this particular piece was called Zuma, and very famous. I believe it's at the Museum of Modern Art in New York right now. So my father decided to put the scissors in Zuma's hand and let her cut out a caricature of Matisse. This one is of Stuart Davis, again, a famous American artist. And my father has captured him in his own style. This is Franz Klein. My father, once again, draws one of the masterpieces of the master and adds a caricature of the master within his own artwork. I hope you've enjoyed this series of artwork that my father produced toward the end of his life. It was definitely his passion